All right. Hello, everyone. I'm hoping this is working. So, my apologies. It's all my fault. I got distracted. I was making soup, and just let things slide by. And yes, then my two colleagues here nagged me on email and said I have to go get this going, and so I did. So here we are. So today's topic, we are going to be talking about scientism. And what do I mean by scientism? Well, it's this idea that if you label something science, it must be true. That's the shortest, simplest definition I can think of. And it's really common in certain fields. For example, uh, some of the more common examples is evolutionary psychology is an example of scientism. It's bad science. But if you criticize it, they will start thumping on you and saying, well, how can you do that? You're denying evolution if you deny my peculiar idiosyncratic definition of how evolution occurred in our history. Other examples, think of scientific racism. They do the same thing. That here's this idea that races are radically different, that have evolved in different ways, have been selected for in different ways. And if you dare to point out that no, there's a whole bunch of gene flow, we've been swapping genes for thousands and thousands of years, and you can't make that kind of sweeping statement about races. And yeah, then they come along and they pound on you and they say, no, you must be denying the facts of genetics and evolution as well. And yeah, so that's scientism. I think Abby's going to talk about these weird things with all these people. I ran into this just last week actually, where somebody announced to me that, well, if you don't believe that there are only two sexes, then you are rejecting all of biology.
Until the seventh grade.
Yeah. So I had to tell them, but you go read the biological literature, and it's all saying exactly the opposite. It's saying there's a continuum, there's a wide range of possibilities. Yeah, in many ways, they're not even saying it's a continuum, that there's all kinds of different stable properties that can emerge in sexual determination. So, we get this all the time. And it's a case of pathologically using science as your testimonial for a bad idea. And so, yeah. We've already got a comment. Is this the original definition of the word? No, it's not. It's an evolving definition. I've only heard it in the context of creationists trying to dismiss the acceptance of science as just another religion. Yes, that happens as well.
And I'd like to suggest there is, in fact, a good reason for that. And that is because people who are engaged in scientism are using science the same way that bigots of various stripes use their religion. I take the view that maybe a lot of my fellow atheists will argue with this. I take the view that religion is not the problem per se, but rather that what people sometimes will do with it is. So you get a lot of people who will pick and choose which bits of the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, whatever you want, is, this is the right bit. This bit, we don't need to worry about that. My God doesn't care about this bit. They care about this bit, and this bit says you're horrible, and things like that. And then people who are either trying to justify the same views using a different holy book, or are trying to pretend that there's no religion or other underlying bias attached to it, will just use science the same way. They'll cherry pick and go, oh, this happens and this happens and this happens and all that. That doesn't matter there. Yeah. Science does not work that way. All of that matters. It always matters.
Yes, that another way to think of scientism is it's a case where you've got an ideological prior belief, and you're just going to rationalize it using bits and pieces of science that fit. And yeah.
Science is not a religion, but scientism is the behavior of treating it like.
Well, and I think it's worth pointing it. So if I just for the fun of it, I did a little bit of poking around before coming on here today, and I think the earliest uses of scientism were kind of uh, interchangeable with the concept of philosophical naturalism, um, and the idea that the universe is completely explicable and understandable through the techniques of science and the knowledge gained through science. And yeah, then it has sort of since become it's still used. It's a little bit like the term atheism, where we've run into problems, at least in this network, of people who are interested in atheism as a part of their understanding of the world versus dictionary atheists who insist that anybody claiming to be an atheist must stick to that and that alone. And I think there's a little bit of that. This is not by any stretch a psychological phenomenon that is unique to scientism or even religion. Yeah. I think.
No.
Yeah. Another point from the comments from Mr. Rediker is that unearned certainty is the problem in my book. And yeah, I have to agree with that too. You know, that's part of the problem of stemming your beliefs on prior ideological biases and being absolutely confident that your bias is true and correct and valid.
I would agree with that and take it one step further, that the problem isn't just unearned certainty, but unearned certainty that where being right about something is then considered more important than like compassion or understanding or anything where you can condemn demographics or circumstances or swaths of people as being bad, you have probably wandered completely off the field as far as science goes.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, there was something I was going to add to that too. What was it? Yeah. So that what we find is people making these judgments, and you know, it's not just simply that they're not recognizing emotional values and things like that, but they're not recognizing the fact that many of those emotional values are correct. That, you know, being emotional about something doesn't automatically make you correct, but it, you know, if you're using that to do an honest investigation of the issues and it leads you to a conclusion that is appropriate to your emotional biases, you know, like that we shouldn't murder people, that's a good one. Then that doesn't make it automatically wrong that you started down this path with an emotional reason.
I think a good version of that actually is I couldn't cite you the exact interview or whatever it was, but a lovely quote from a person none of you have probably heard of called Jordan Peterson, in which he somebody asked him something along the lines of, you know, do you believe in, you know, the right to gay marriage? And he entered into his sort of typical waffle of, you know, oh well, you know, I don't know, maybe. But basically his thing was, hypothetically, in theory, he thinks it's fine, but he opposes it specifically because the person asking the question had said that that's a thing the SJWs are all about, and so on and so forth. And so in his view, because it was being supported for the wrong reason, therefore it should be opposed by right-minded people.
I appreciate the use of the word right in that sentence.
Yeah, well, it's some of the sort of notes of things I had to talk about here. It doesn't have to be all now, but was just there's a degree to which, as with other sort of religious constructs or pseudo-religious constructs, it has taken on a degree of kind of there are magic words and spells you can use to make problems go away, and so it sort of mixes in with a kind of bizarre use of sort of shallow understanding of logical fallacies and all this other stuff to sort of provide justification to dismiss things you don't like as long as you can find the right set of words to wave them away.
That kind of dovetails with an interesting behavior I've seen with MAGAs and other alt-right types online who seem to think, excellent, here comes CD, who seem to think that the jargon that the left uses, and things like institutionalized racism and other very relevant sociological concepts, are somehow themselves magic words which can be turned back on us and not detailed concepts that mean things. That's basically where you get the whole trope of them going, aha, you're the real racist because you said something bad about white people. It's like, that is not how any of that works.
Mm-hmm.
It also makes me think a bit of the sovereign citizen movement.
Lord.
Like Comma, for example, PZ's perennial correspondent. Where again, like they view the kind of Byzantine, I guess, labyrinthine nature of American law and legal code and language as some kind of grimoire to be interpreted. And if you can say the right words in the right way at the right time, it gets you access to all sorts of rights and privileges and resources that, mere mortals cannot dream of.
That's right. I'm sure CD can assure us that the law is a magical incantation. And if you know the right words, you can get whatever you want.
Yeah, I've been wishing that for a long, long time. No, it's very interesting because not only do they believe quite seriously that there is this incantation magic, and I don't use that phrase lightly, but the way that they insist that simply spelling their name with extra punctuation and whatever invokes separate rights rather than having to make an argument fundamentally misunderstands everything and more resembles an incantation than anything else, certainly anything in law. But in addition to that, they simply don't ever approach the law attempting to find out what it is. It is always only what they wish it to be. So the law is endless argumentation. I mean, there's a reason why I chose to go to law school. The law is endless argumentation. You have to argue for absolutely everything that you want. You put in a petition and you argue. And the people that are involved in those movements really believe that the form, rather than the content of the argument, is going to be what's successful in getting them what they want. And that's just not true.
Yeah, there's lots of things where they play that game with the form. If you just deny someone their pronouns, the problem goes away, right? You can turn somebody into a cis heterosexual person just by referring to them as he or him, depending on what chromosomes they've got. Which isn't how any of this works.
Are assumed to have.
Yes, that's another good point.
Which brings us cleanly back to the scientism thing, in fact, because there you have an absolutely magnificent platinum iridium example of one small scientific fact, but not all the details, that a lot of people got a hold of and then attempted to use it to force their ideology on things. It's like, no, it's XX or XY. That's all that happens. That is not all that happens. And even within XX and XY, that's not even 10% of the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah, I've mentioned before that I used to teach undergrad genetics course where we actually tested people's chromosomes. this was 30 years ago, before we got wise to the fact that sometimes, in fact, almost routinely, you'd have a student who had an aberration of some sort in their chromosomes. They deviated from the standard 46 chromosomes. And that is not something you want to discover when you're a junior in genetics at the university.
Well, and especially not in front of, 30, 50 classmates. It's not private information that you're taking in. This is suddenly public because it's part of this experiment and discussion that you're doing.
That's right. Yeah, because it's not just the professor, it's the students who are discovering.
Although ironically, that wouldn't be true if there wasn't such a stigma about these things. And I would be inclined to go so far as to suggest that the stigma about chromosomal anomalies comes both from ableism and anti-queer beliefs.
Yep. Yeah, so instead of teaching that lab nowadays, instead what I do in the course itself, I have a whole section where I just lead them through the scientific literature and show them, here's all these published chromosome sets, and here's all these little differences between the expected norm that are quite common and routine. And yet these individuals, if you saw them in person, and sometimes we have photos of them so I can show them what they look like in person, you would just say, okay, that's some guy, that's some woman, that's some person who's perfectly ordinary, even though they got this weird thing with their chromosomes. They're all tangled and twisted around in some place.
Yeah, and
well,
I think
there's... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's very telling how the sorts of people who try to weaponize the concept of chromosomes deal with the incontrovertible fact that there are configurations that are not 46XY, and they're walking around and they're real, and they always just go, oh no, that's a mistake, that's an aberration, it's a disease, that doesn't count. And it's like, doesn't count, but you just said it exists. Those are people. And I think that says a lot about the mindset that's trying to force these things, any form of scientism, to be normative. They're trying to use science to be prescriptive when it isn't. It's descriptive always.
Yep. Yeah, but they've got a simple solution, is when just get everybody tested, and the ones who have weird chromosomes, you ship them off to a camp somewhere.
I vote for XY. I vote for the XY people being shipped off to the camp.
Oh no, because I have actually tested my chromosomes. Not that's me. Oh darn. Of course, you guys.
Maybe we can apply for citizenship in the matriarchy.
Yeah. But
I think one thing I wanted to put in that sort of ties all these together is that it is less so like I would say there's a degree to which scientism is honestly less of a problem in climate change. Most of where it crops up is where there is some form of bigotry. And I was making this point earlier. Somebody had shared a picture of some of our lovely servants in uniform, the law enforcement personnel of the United States, who had literally torn the shirt off of a young white man and were like shoving him ahead of a marching line of thugs. And, people were saying, hey, it's almost like this is a problem that doesn't just affect Black people. Maybe we need a few more allies out here. And what came to mind was a quote by one Lee Atwater about the Southern strategy, which I won't go into the full detail of the quote, but the sort of the conclusion that it often ends with is, in the end, what really matters, no matter how abstract you get, is that Black folks get hurt worse than white folks. But what's I find key there is that white folks do get hurt. And if you expand it, men get hurt by patriarchy. Cis folks get hurt by heteronormativity. As Abby was saying, with, the stigmas surrounding having genes that fall outside of the peaks of the bimodal distribution, where there's a degree to which those in the privileged group in any sort of axis of oppression are basically, by supporting that, saying they're willing to hurt themselves so long as the target of their ire is hurt worse. And it's a self-destructive, spiteful approach to things, and has all of these kind of really sort of incredible in a horrific way constructs just built around it to justify it, saying, you know, I'm willing to cut off my fingers if it means you lose your whole hand. That's kind of wish you could get people to see that.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's a useful strategy for getting people on your side. So, for example, when Trump was here in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago, he got up there and he gave this, you know, one of his usual awful speeches. But one of the things he said was, "Oh, you people in Minnesota, you got such good genes. You've got very good genes." And, you know, Minnesota is pretty white, so you can kind of get the implication there. But even without that, who is it that he's going to think has bad genes? Where are the bad genes, and what are we going to do about it? So that's scientism too, to be thinking, oh, well, all we got to do is identify the good genes and we know who's who. And that's kind of,
I mean, with Trump, I always feel like if somebody were to actually dissect the man, you'd find out that every single thing he brags about would turn out to be like completely backwards. And so, you know, it wouldn't surprise me to turn out that, like, I don't think this is true of all bigots who, you know, accuse other people of you know, various whatever they think is bad.
Negative quality,
but
yeah.
With Trump, yeah, well, there's the trope of, you know, the hyper homophobic conservative politician who then is caught being a closeted gay person with some serious mental issues, I guess. And I don't think that's true for, you know, most homophobes, but I think for Trump, like, it wouldn't shock me to learn that, you know, he had been tested and had something weird with his genes. Just because
but again,
it seems to be how it works for so much of what he says.
Yeah, what is
by weird? I mean outside of the peaks on the bimodal distribution.
Okay.
I apologize.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, one of the things I try to get across to my students is that there's nothing weird about anybody's genes. That there's differences, but they're all great. And
yeah, I mean,
fair.
That kind of sounded like you were trying to make an argument that Trump has like Klinefelters or something. It's like, what? No, he's a malignant narcissist. That's not really a genetic thing.
That is a fair interpretation of what I said, and I apologize. That was not what I was attempting to convey, so my bad.
You're just suspecting he's not as good genes by his
not
definition.
Even that. Like, I was thinking something like very small that has no effect on him as a person, or like any of his abilities or capacities, or like one of the little things that you'd never know about if you didn't check, but because his family's weird, they checked, and now he can't get it out of his head, if you see what I mean.
I guess it's possible, but I think we're going down a dangerous road when we start trying to make armchair psychological speculations about what encourages someone to be a particular way. One of the comments on our YouTube said, now you're just describing Republicans and Brexiteers, and a big smiley face. But the thing is, we kind of are. Not because that's the purpose of any of this, but because the current version of Republicans, who are indistinguishable from Brexiteers, start from a position of a lack of empathy. Like they've decided there's a bunch of people who are the problem. Different people, although also often the same ones. Funny how white supremacy works that way. And then they move from the like axiomatic idea that everything that's wrong is the fault of those people over there, towards trying to find excuses for the policies they want to put in place. And then depending on who they're trying to convince, they'll cherry pick science, they'll cherry pick history, they'll cherry pick religion. It's just anything. And it's all because it starts from the axioms of who they think deserves to be hurt.
Well said.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the other thing is that, I could characterize some of my neighbors, well, not my immediate neighbors, but some people in this county as kind of redneck, hillbilly, progressive types. But I don't think that's biological at all. I think that's a consequence of problems in education and unequal distribution of wealth, and that these people would be so much better off and so much more empathic if they had been given the opportunity instead of being starved to death by Republican policies, which just perpetuate Republican policies some more. So, that we're not going to find the answers in biology. I think we'd be better off looking in sociology, and that's one of those disciplines they hate.
Well, and
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I've noted because some of my work was cross-disciplinary and significantly involved sociology. It's very interesting to me how sociological and anthropological perspectives, which are incorporating the best practices, the best scientific practices that those disciplines can muster, routinely come out with certain statements about how, for instance, gender or race functions within a society, how age functions within a society, where we determine adulthood to be, and what are the consequences of reaching adulthood. And in a number of societies, there are kind of multiple age transitions. There's often one around puberty, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then another around 20, 21, 22, which I think is very interesting. And because of how brain development continues throughout the teen years, I'm not the expert to talk about whether or not that really reflects some maturation of our abilities to perform what are called executive functions. But these really do occur in patterns in different societies, and they've been well observed. And we've made lots of observations, and we can reasonably extrapolate certain good information and certain good models about how this happens, how societies function. I mean, that's the whole point of sociology. And yet, when you bring this to bear, it's incredibly common for these very same people that we're talking about to dismiss this. It's the Pluckrose-Lindsay disdain for sociology. They have their own personal anecdotes about what it feels like to be them in a particular environment. And for them, that overrides everything that anybody could ever learn through systematic observation, empiricism, development of models, and testing of models. Like, none of that counts when they have their preferred anecdote about what they actually experienced. And because we all experience society, sociology comes in hard for these kinds of dismissive attacks.
Yeah.
Well, this is one where
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, this is one where I regret that Rebecca had to back out, because she just done a video on some research into conservative brains or I guess conservative perception of the world.
Wait, did they prove they have some? I'm kidding. That's not nice.
I mean, it's not nice, but I get it. But the big thing, and this ties into a blog post I did fairly recently, is that they seem to have a stronger fear response.
Yeah.
And it's not clear if that's a result of being raised a certain way, or like living, is it nature or is it nurture? It's hard to tell. But conservative politics also seem to very much center around some of the sort of easiest rhetorical tactics, which is generating some version of fight or flight in your audience and then telling them how to make that feeling go away. And it sort of, it seems like conservative politics, rhetoric, and policies all center around that. Well, the policies seem to center around concentrating power and making life better for rich and powerful people. And the approach to achieving that seems to be keep people scared and angry. And the people most susceptible to that are the ones who tend to swing conservative. I don't know. Getting back to the actual topic of scientism, I sort of feel like it's a rejection of theory and an obsession with the details and so that's where you get, like, you know, show me the one paper that proves X.
I think it's more of an act of desperation. The world is complicated and terrifying and horrible. And let's face it, the things we're talking about as far as sociological problems and so forth, that absolutely affect people with conservative leanings. Like they often are legitimately having difficulties in their lives and traditionally down through. I mean, think of coal miners in Virginia who are very strongly conservative, but on the other hand, their entire history is of being horribly exploited by capitalism. But they're proud of the jobs. That was an engineered thing. I've lost my point. But I think it's a matter of trying to find a desperate need for a simple solution. To, like, my life is bad and I'm terrified of a number of things. Help. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, you can either understand this edifice of sociological phenomena and institutional issues and attempt to fight alongside hundreds of thousands or millions of other people to try and fix them, or you can hate the Jews.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
but I
getting
think
back
it's also,
to... Oh, go ahead.
I think it's also very much about control, right? We see this, my initial career was anti-domestic, anti-sexual violence work. And I did that for quite a number of years. And you see it over and over again with survivors of rape and sexual violence. You see it over and over again with survivors of domestic violence. They'll want to say, you know, I got hit because I burned the pot roast. I got raped because my skirt was too short. And these are the same types of victim blaming narratives that we find it easy to criticize when they come from regressives who support rape culture or support masculine dominance in relationships. But we struggle to understand why somebody who's an actual victim of these types of situations, these types of crimes, these types of violence, we struggle to understand why these people would articulate these same things that appear to us to be very hostile to the very people that are actually saying them. But the psychological need there has really been pinpointed through research, and it's about control. If I got raped because my skirt was too short, then I know that I can simply choose to wear a longer skirt and I'll be safe. And that ameliorates the fear that I've been feeling about going out in public ever since this rape happened, right? If I know that burning the pot roast gets me hit, then all I need to do is not burn the pot roast and suddenly I'm safe again, right? So I set an extra timer or I do this other thing. And it affects people in those violent relationships as well. I mean, that's where when we see people talking about walking on eggshells, that's very much a scary kind of image to us. But from the inside, where we talk about, oh, I set multiple timers to make sure I didn't burn the pot roast. But this is, you know, of course, the metaphorical pot roast. When I set multiple metaphorical timers, when I'm paying attention to where I am in the house to make sure that I'm not ever too far away from a timer, all those things that we do, those are about control and about safety, trying to put when I get hit and when I don't get hit back into my hands, back into my power. And so when you see, you know, labor activists talking about he's spouting anti-Semitism and that it's really the Jews that do this or that, rather than the structure of the entire enterprise they're involved in. Well, it's possible that I could continue to mine coal or continue to do that thing which I know how to do, work on a car assembly line or whatever, if only I removed Jews from the power structure. Then I'm safe, right? And so I can identify Jews through names or through whatever, and I can take this one action. It's about giving yourself something to do that helps make yourself safe from that threat. And so, of course, that helps us understand as well, this research about the larger the fear response, the more susceptible you are to this. If you're not afraid of the consequence, then you don't need to control whether or not the consequence occurs.
There's a flip side to it too, in that the person who punches somebody else for burning the pot roast can now have a simple excuse. It's not because I'm violent and cruel and unkind to somebody I'm married to or whatever. It's because they burnt the pot roast. Burning pot roast justifies socking them in the jaw, and we get all that all over the place here with. Yeah, so it's doubly reinforcing because the victim is going along with it and saying, "Yeah, I want the control," and the perpetrator is going along with it and saying, "Yeah, I want a reason to just haul off and punch her to the moon or whatever."
Yeah,
and that doesn't blame me.
Right, it's not his fault at all. He's just this is just a natural cause and effect. Burnt pot roasts get you punched.
Which is kind of interesting. Like, I don't know how far this metaphor goes really, but given that a lot of right-wing politics tends to be driven at the top echelons by people who the few people who do directly benefit from those policies, the ultra wealthy and their buddies, and the people who have international sex parties and on planes, and that's interesting. It does actually weirdly seem to have the dynamic of an abusive relationship. You've got the guys on top who are damaging everyone and using these simple explanations and ideology to provide the illusion of control to the people on the bottom, who will then sort of go, "Thank you, sir, may I have another?" as long as people they like less are still being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Which interesting, which actually brings me to just something I wanted to mention that always struck me as the single weirdest thing. Because, I much as I think it's deplorable and a very bad idea, I can at least understand the concept of like how a mindset would get to the point of fearing the other and hating someone who's not like you because you don't understand that. Like, I get that. But the one I don't get is ideological economic policy. Because the right-wing people do tend to go business, 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 economy. And if they truly meant that, they would look at historically what policies have improved the economy, increased the flow of money, actually brought businesses into existence and so forth, but they don't. Historically, economies almost invariably improve under liberal or as liberal as you can get administrations and contract under conservative ones. So it's like, but why do you want to do that?
I mean, I think a lot of this is where we get into, I guess, the kind of horrific juncture between the intersection between. I feel like we need a band like Evil Intersectionality or something. The intersection between the Ayn Rand kind of shit and sort of conservative, the desire, the spite politics we've been talking about, of the desire to hurt yourself, to hurt the other worse, to feel like you have control. And so there's the economic ideology that it's all down to what we ourselves are capable of doing. There is a hierarchy that is just, that is good. And if we look out for ourselves, we will find our natural and right place in the hierarchy. We will be taken care of as best as is possible by those above us because they are the smartest, best people. And that's reinforced then by horror stories of how, every single communist state is just an endless grinding misery and death. And, nobody ever smiles in Cuba, which I can vouch is not true. And like, so it's the same kind of thing where like there's the revulsion of that which is different, and that's that sort of culture war stuff is blended with the economic message and with the desire for an authority that's going to take care of us, and the feeling that we all have our place in the world, and it all just sort of smushes together in this kind of horrific interstate highway pileup of confusion and ideology and rejection of reality that isn't convenient, and the notion that you have to work with people you don't like, and that maybe everything doesn't depend on you and what you choose to do. And it's comforting to think that there's a way in which it's comforting to think that all of the problems that you're experiencing are your fault, because then you can fix them if you just figure out how. And I can sell you this book that'll tell you how to fix it for only $15.99, and come to my speech for $55.99 ahead, and I'll have you say self-affirming things, and you're gonna feel great by the end of it, and maybe we'll walk on coals, and so on.
Well, you've just successfully used the just world fallacy, as one of the commenters mentioned, to draw a perfect straight line from Ayn Rand to Jordan Peterson.
Yep, it's pretty easy to do, actually. But
yeah, it's not difficult. No. But that's just it,
not
though, because
good.
It is the just world fallacy, though. It's people believing they can control everything just by controlling themselves. Like,
right,
and if your life doesn't come out the way you want it to, it's your fault. Oh, okay. Well, based on what?
It's also the idea that hierarchies reflect an actual hierarchy of value in all things, which is something Peterson is really prone to do. Sure, hierarchies exist, but they're not necessarily hierarchies of the type you want to enshrine. Yeah. So lobster hierarchies are based on how good they are at pissing in each other's faces.
Your brain will literally melt.
Yeah. Should we follow that model here and just start peeing on everybody as we go by, and whoever has the greatest volume or maybe the stinkiest urine gets put on the top of the hierarchy? Does that necessarily mean
funny tangent?
Yes.
So I worked for a couple summers on the Appalachian Trail in Connecticut as a ridge runner, just tromping around in the woods and trying to persuade people to follow the rules and whatnot. And I read whatever books I came across while I was doing that, in the various shelters and lean-tos and the like. And one of them was a bit of a brick about the Irish hero Finn McCool. And quite literally, one of the plot points of him demonstrating what an awesome, badass person he is his ability to piss longer for a larger volume and longer distance than one of his officers. So, there's a tradition there.
Well, yeah, I remember growing up and me and my cousins would do that. So, yeah.
A pissing contest came from somewhere.
Yeah.
Minnesota,
and boys in general
apparently.
are disgusting. Well, this was Washington State, so
that's not better.
I think that humans in general have a whatever it is that humans can do, other humans can also do, and therefore we compare the things that we can do. And so that includes every form of bodily projection.
So back to scientism, maybe. So we would measure these things using metric.
Yes, go ahead.
I've gotten sparked out on that one.
One of the things
Actually,
that
oh yes, okay, go ahead.
one of the things that I thought about as we were just talking about Jordan Peterson is people probably know I've written. I mean, amongst the four of us, people probably know. Although I'm not sure how many other people might have read me. But I actually wrote a couple of times about Jordan Peterson's scientism, as we're using the term today. And I wanted to make the point that scientists are not immune to scientism, right? And Jordan Peterson is a classic example of that. As long as we've brought him up already, his legitimate research was in personality testing, which is not an area with which I'm conversant, but I know a tiny bit. And he has a test, a personality test, the unfakeable big five, which relates to these 5 primary aspects of personality, which psychology has identified. And then without ever studying how those personality traits relate to false confessions, he purported to an Albertan court that he was an expert in using his personality test to determine whether or not a confession was reliable. He was attempting to testify as an expert witness on behalf of the defense in an important case, and a person had confessed and then said that they were sure that their confession was false, and the court shouldn't give credence to it and should not allow a jury to see it. And they were that motion was not successful. So they had to have some sort of expert come in to say, okay, you've seen the confession, but here's why you shouldn't believe that the confession is true. And Peterson said that he administered the test to the defendant, and based on these few responses to personality questions, he could tell whether or not the confession was false. Only he had never studied false confessions, much less studied how individual aspects of personality on this personality test related to the likelihood that a confession might be false. He just made that up out of whole cloth. And he really believed that he could simply see from looking at the data of this test with which he was familiar with, a myriad of other things, how likely a person was to falsely confess was just one of them. But yeah, he put this incredible predictive power in his hands based on this personality test that was entirely unjustified.
Yeah,
that's another nice example of scientism, though. Is criminal justice system is full of it. Yeah, things like
ridiculously much. Half of forensic just doesn't work as well as people think it does. More than half. Which is unfortunate, because at least that's trying to bring some science in. Peterson's an interesting case just by being an example, not by being anything that's particularly unique. Yes, he is a scientist who wound up becoming also a scientismist. The endings don't work right. But then you have an interesting phenomenon going on where somebody who is trained in science, who then falls prey to mistaking their own prejudices for science, who starts unconsciously perhaps using science as a religion, starts viewing themselves therefore as a priest.
Mm-hmm.
I have some entrails to fix that.
I think that's what you get here a lot of the time, because if you think about it, huge swaths, and interestingly, here we have a case where we're not talking about an atheist at all. Like, Peterson is avowedly Christian. But he usually is talking about science things as though they're, or at least as though things as though they're science things. And he acts like it's his job to interpret the scriptures, which is to say scientific results. But it doesn't work that way. You can't just decide it's something and then go do that. Oh, good Lord. Somebody in the, I think somebody in the comments just mentioned the, what was it, the demon sperm doctor? Oh, that was interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, she's a doctor. She must be using science, right? Yeah.
That's not scientism, I don't think. That's just you've lost your mind with a unique interpretation of religion.
Right. But it's still a really common thing for people to, trot out their credentials in something else as an authority. So yeah, if you're, I could probably make good money just bilking people with a biology degree. I've got a biology PhD. So yeah, you should believe
Okay, you could write
everything.
self-help books.
Yeah.
I'd never do this. Not even as a matter of scruples, but just as a matter of this is obviously not worth the effort for the return. But it has crossed my mind a few times to go out and get a PhD from a terrible low-end, degree mill institution, solely so that then I could put the letters PhD after my name on something that I can sell to people who aren't going to look too closely.
Yep. I've known some creationists who have gone out and done that. And worse, there was one guy I debated who went out to get 13 degrees. Multiple
Interesting
PhDs,
number.
multiple. Yeah. Well, he was probably working on more. He was still taking classes. But it's as if he thought that somehow made him smarter and have more authority because he's got a string of letters he can stick after his name. Whereas if you talk to real scientists, no, one PhD is enough. You can stop there. You've demonstrated that you know how to do research. Next step is go out and do the research and do the work. And it
starts to sound weirdly bloated, though. If one person is saying, you should believe me, I'm a doctor, and then someone else is saying, believe me, I'm 13 doctors. It's, what? That's not how that works.
This guy tried that when, I get introduced to his PZ Myers PhD. And the first thing he did was a testimonial about his history in the Baptist religion or whatever. But then the second thing was to start trotting out all of his degrees to show that he was more worth listening to than that other guy on the stage.
This is PZ Myers. He's king of the north.
He be our dread leader, Purple Beard.
I've noticed a trend similar to this in the fields of climate denial, which is even leaving aside lunatics like Monckton or just hacks like, I don't know, Mark Morano. There are a number of people who are scientists of one sort or another who exist. They use there's one guy, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was in some obnoxious documentary. I think the guy's like a geologist or something, but he claimed to be a climatologist for years and claims to teach climatology in the climatology department of a school that didn't have a climatology department, and showed up on some climate denial documentary like silhouetted because the climate, I don't know, KGB was going to come get him and put him in a climate gulag for his bravery of saying the things that he's said multiple times in public. But they set up this whole thing where they had to go out to an island to meet him and film in shadow and so on. And it was like, you could tell from the voice and from what the guy was saying, it was nearly identical to interviews he'd given on things like Fox News.
Right.
But he has a PhD, unquestionably, and therefore
there's also those people who go out and claim authority in climate, and they are meteorologists. They're weather people. What's his name? Anthony Watt. That's his claim to fame, is he used to read the weather on air, so he knows climate science.
And the problem with a lot of that is ultimately credentials of any kind don't actually have a bearing on whether you're correct about whatever you're saying.
Yeah. The other thing is that a few years ago, we had this Project Steve, because the Discovery Institute came out with a list of people who signed a document saying they disagreed with evolutionary theory. And our response was, we'll do something where they sign a document that says they agree with evolutionary theory, but we'll only accept people named Steve or Stephanie or versions thereof. But anyway, when you analyze the creationist document, you discover that most of the so-called degreed people who disagree with evolution are dentists.
That's so weird.
Oh, yeah, so it's like, okay, yeah.
Do you think teeth didn't evolve?
Well, obviously not. They were created.
That's interesting, though.
There's a lot of people with professional degrees, which are difficult to get, and you have to be smart to do it, but they don't require any engagement with science in order to achieve it. That, engineers, dentists, doctors, they're not necessarily qualified to talk about. Okay, lawyers
because
too.
We're good at arguing. No,
Yes.
Because we're good at arguing, sometimes we think that means that we're smarter or more correct about the world just because we can win an argument. And we're very skilled at winning arguments, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're correct about the world.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
If you imagine a spherical brain.
Of course I can imagine a spherical brain. I've watched the news. Perfectly smooth.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's all very disheartening, and I don't know. I just wish people would listen more, because it's.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. What did you say?
I see what you did there.
Yeah. And I think we're getting into a phase where maybe we should talk about solutions. What are people's solutions for all of this?
I don't know, although I do want to mention one of the commenters just said, engineering methodologies are guided by science, not faith. And that's an interesting claim that ties in with what we just said about it seems to be often the applied technologists of one stripe or another that are less likely to understand. That's because the scientific method is often not part of what we do. And I qualify for that. I'm a software engineer. That's me. So, and it's not. It's like actual proper double-blind science, working the statistics properly. This is not part of my job, but people who don't know better might think it is.
Right. It also fosters a faith in certain things. Like engineers have lots and lots of tables of empirical data they use to make conclusions about how to design something. And so there's a reliance on prior data without further exploration of the data behind it. And that can make you think, oh, things are done. We know the answer to this. We're through. And that can lead you into these problems too.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. I mean, one of my favorite comedians is Dara O'Brien. And highly recommended, by the way. He's a very science and minded sort of guy.
Get in the sack. Right. I know that one.
Yes. Although from a different show from that, he said something about somebody coming up to him about something similar and going, well, science doesn't know everything. And I loved his response to that, which is like, well, science knows it doesn't know everything. Otherwise, it would stop.
Yeah.
But that lovely line encapsulates an important point. Science doesn't claim to know everything, specifically corrects itself, but also it's also about finding out why. Not just how, but why, insofar as why is this thing that can be grappled with. Science doesn't even claim to be able to explain all that is in the universe. It just says it's one path to a likely good explanation.
Yep, we got a process and we'll work on it.
I think this brings us back a little bit, since we're talking about solutions. One of the points I mentioned earlier is that there's a degree to which scientism is an embrace of the aesthetic and sort of mechanics of science and a rejection of theory in a lot of ways. because you can use it's sort of like the gears on a steampunk outfit. Gears equal clockwork. Therefore, if you have a hat with gears on it, it is a clockwork hat. And it ignores all of the math and diagrams and sort of theories of timing and all of this other stuff that go into actually building a clock. And I think it is, I think it's similar in a way to science, where they want the aesthetic. They like, the test tubes and the bubbling apparatuses and the long strings of numbers and equations, and they want it to meet, they want the aesthetic without having to learn the difficult stuff behind it that actually makes it do something functional. And so I very much fear that I think it's obvious to anybody that there's no easy answer for what to do about it, but a lot of it is just kind of, I think, as honestly the social justice movement has been working on, teaching people to understand how to think about theory and how to use theory and how to apply theory, and what the difference between theory and in social justice, the version where they claim that, oh, it's all about a hierarchy just like us, but it's based on who's the most oppressed today. And it's there's no easy answer, because theory is difficult sometimes. It's not always intuitive, but I think it really does come down to, I don't know. I'm going to trail off here.
I think that the what would help would be two things if this could be achieved. And Betsy DeVos is the avatar of trying to prevent what I'm about to say. Education is the thing that's needed, but I don't even mean in the general case. I mean, general case education, good, very good, yes. But the thing that tends to be missing is critical thinking. If people were properly taught critical thinking, question what you're told, and also critical thinking still applies to what you believe. Now you're getting into the area where people start to take their own egos and identities out of how they need to understand the world and start arriving at what actually makes sense. What does the evidence show? What are people actually like?
Yeah, and you have to also be ready to discard your prior opinions. There's no point in doing science if you're just trying to confirm everything. It gets interesting when you start finding, oh, this hypothesis doesn't work. I have to come up with a new one. That's always much better. But something that Abe mentioned, I just have to touch on one of my favorite funny moments in dealing with creationists is, I don't know if you've ever heard of D. James Kennedy of Coral Gables Ministry, who put
Not
out
A. James Kennedy, D. James Kennedy.
D. James Kennedy, yes. He came out with a documentary proving evolution was wrong. One of the first things he showed was Hitler's Nazis marching. But anyway, when the documentary opens, D. James Kennedy comes strolling out in a pristine white lab coat, and there's a table with all these colored fluids in flasks and beakers, and there's dry ice, and there's things bubbling. That was it. That's science to these guys. I think it's a classic example of the kind of scientism we're talking about, where you put on the trappings as you perceive them of science. And no, that's not science, what you're showing me there.
It's not. Although you have to admit, that stuff is fun.
Yes, it
always struck me when I was doing, like, I'm not an expert in this by any means, but it always struck me when I was doing various undergrad chemistry courses way back when, how rarely things were different colors. All kinds of stuff happened, but almost always the solutions and fluids were clear.
I will say, just a little thing on the aesthetic and how it is really, I don't know, a pleasant and interesting aesthetic. One of the things that I loved about discovering about Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog was that his lair in that movie is actually somebody's house. For those who didn't know, where this guy just has this bar set up with all of these tubes and stuff, and like a giant bank vault door and an oversized chair and stuff. And they just used some guy's house as a supervillain lair, and it worked very well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That was all. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's just a fact we cannot get away from is the simple fact is that aesthetics can be fun, but they don't help understanding.
Right. And they can also aesthetics can be used to mislead.
Yeah.
So those are things. But yeah, I agree about one of our solutions is more critical thinking. We got to get, too many shallow sorts of science classes are all about memorizing a collection of facts, and that is not science. That's the outcome of the scientific process. But
yeah.
But it's also those classes can, in trying to correct that, I have seen certain teachers veer too far into, well, all these theories are plausible, instead of immediately using critical thinking to prune some out and say not every opinion is equal. And so, we have to get away from memorizing facts, but we also have to make sure that we're not accidentally endorsing the idea that all opinions are equally valid.
Right. And you also have to have some standards in the process. I mean, I judge science fairs every year. And for every student who does a really marvelous job and has a great hypothesis and tests it reasonably, even if it's a really simple hypothesis, there's 10 more students that are doing crap. They have no idea what they're doing. And apparently they're not getting any guidance from their teachers. Here in rural Minnesota, I have seen so many science fair projects where all they do is, what is the effect of the choke on my shotgun on the blast pattern? And
well,
it's a series of targets. But
I think that gets into a whole different important issue in education, which is how do you instill a love of learning in people? Yeah. Because I do love science. But I remember science fairs as being a bloody slog, annoying as hell, that the teachers would force us to do. Like, you've got to go do these experiment-shaped things that we're talking about, and then write it all up in the most boring way possible, and make a 3-paneled thing and show off how bored you were. It's like, no, that's not instilling love.
And also, there's a tendency there's books out there now, of great science fair projects, and hand the student that and tell them, pick one of those and do it. That's not valid. I mean, that's not asking a real question.
So one of the, I had an academic job a while back before I was, a retail cashier and then a blogger for my income. I worked for about 10 years writing curriculum and lesson plans, mostly focused on climate change and teaching climate science to kids that were like, 6th grade and up. And the focus of our work was trying to link the classroom experience as much as possible with local scientific institutions, so that students could actually take time to go out into wherever they were. The focal point was the Manomet Bird Observatory in Massachusetts. And basically there was a bunch of people doing, good science, observing birds, mostly migration patterns and stuff like that. And they were they had observations of sort of ecological mismatch where the weather, the conditions sparking a bird to migrate north for the spring weren't lining up anymore with the conditions causing bugs to come out in the spring. And so they were trying to line that up with the conditions causing plants to start their spring activities. And so we had students out there measuring leaf length in spring ephemeral plants and stuff like that, and trying to sort of fill in a kind of pixel art of an ecosystem in flux. And I do think like I'd spent a lot of time looking into, I guess, what at the time we called citizen science. Now there's a move to call that more community science, which I think is better. But I think that a lot of the solution may be down to breaking down the barriers between experts and non-experts, not by making non-experts think they're, not by sort of denigrating expertise, but by trying to involve the community in any research that's going on nearby as much as possible. And so we also had a project with the Mystic River in Somerville and Medford has a herring run every year where the herring, just, bazillions of alewives and blueback herrings go up the river and spawn, and they go through a dam. And so there's a camera on the fish ladder. And so we tried to help them set up a thing where people could sign in, and you'd have, as many people as felt like it online counting fish going by on the video. And you'd have, if you had 50 people counting the same 50-second video clip, you're going to get a pretty accurate count of how many fish went in a given direction. And that also, it's about teaching the process of science. And in so doing, it's a lot easier than to convey the theory behind the process. So it's not just, what are you doing? What are you measuring? What are you mixing together? But why are you doing it? And as you're teaching how to do it, you can also teach why you're doing it. And it's not easy, and it's not cheap, and it's not quick, but I think it's a valid pathway to something different in our sort of societal understanding of science, as more than just a list of facts.
I just like the fact that there was a fish ladder there intended to help the herring run. That would be a herring aid, wouldn't it?
Oh,
bravo.
Okay, so we've been going over an hour. We should wrap it up here. Does anybody have any last words that they want to issue?
If you're hearing somebody spout off about science, look it up and make sure they know what they're talking about, because boy, do the ideological types like to go, no, that's not true. But, This is why you throw away the WHO. This is why you have almost 200 countries getting together in a worldwide pact to deal with the coronavirus, and the US said no. I don't know if you guys heard about that.
Yes, that
was special.
So I have one thing to say, which I think actually I want to say that this is relevant not just for science, but also for the political upheaval that many parts of the world are dealing with right now. And like in general, if you can, learn theory and talk about theory. This goes for economic theory, this goes for political theory, this goes for scientific theory.
And understand
because
the
it's
difference
very
between
easy to
theory
see a
and
bunch of disparate
hypothesis.
facts. It's definitely theory and hypothesis, but it's very easy to take a bunch of different facts and connect the dots with them and come up with all sorts of interesting patterns. But theory is the ways in which you can see how people have tested the utility of those patterns in reflecting reality. And that's how you can actually start to understand the differences between, communism and anarchism and ecology. And like all of these different things have a lot of thought behind them, and it's really interesting. And once you can kind of start seeing the inner workings, you can look at, the clock and see how it's more than just a jumble of gears that are all moving somehow. And so I think like glamorizing the study of theory, not to denigrate those who haven't had the opportunity, but as a way to kind of push continuing adult education. I think that there's value in that.
Yeah, you need a balance of theory and empirical evidence, but you know, understanding the theory is also one good way to weed out the crazy ideas out there. I mean, for example, people keep trotting out homeopathy. And if you know the theory of homeopathy and you know how, you know, the basic principles of how disease in the body responds to it, you'd know right off the bat, no, that can't be. That doesn't work. Yeah, if you're gonna make the case that this really off the wall theory is adequate, you have to do a lot of work to back it up first, and they haven't done it.
Yeah, that's actually that's my big conclusion is I like everyone to be skeptical when they hear that a DNA test ruled out the possibility that anyone other than a defendant did it to a ridiculous degree. Just think on this. We know that twins separated at birth exist. Since twins separated at birth exist, there's always at least some chance that this person is a person with an unknown twin, since we know it's happened within the United States. The United States has a population of 300 million-ish. You could never, ever have a confidence in the billions. The max you could have would be a confidence in the tens of millions, which, you know, I agree, it's picking at hairs, and reasonable doubt has to be reasonable. I don't mind that. But when you hear people citing numbers that seem extreme, you have to just pay attention to what are the basic facts on the ground that could confound this. Does this make sense? And anything over a few tens of millions doesn't make sense. We know that twins separated at birth exist.
Yeah, and another question would be why do you think that number is that impressive? I mean, the evidence ought to be on what the person did and what evidence that there is that they did that, and things like motive and opportunity and all that kind of good stuff. And just finding DNA matches doesn't answer any of that.
No.
Anyway,
that brings us back to an entirely different topic about how one side wants to get rid of problems by trying to alleviate the pressures that cause them, and the other side wants to get rid of problems by finding the bad people and punishing them. And that's just a whole other.
Yeah.
Fascism.
Not even. That's
okay.
actually a simpler philosophy of what causes people to be bad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Christian philosophy for one thing. But
Anyway, thanks for a great session.
oh, it's been fun. Yes. So.
And in 18 minutes, CD and I are doing a different panel, the panel of inexperts.
Which is one of the reasons I'm eager to get off.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fair enough.
And I will
everyone.
go
Take care of
advertise that on
yourselves.
social media and get everybody to show up for that. So yeah, in 18 minutes. It's not on my channel, it's on HJ's channel. But I will post a link to it on my blog and things like that. So get out there and have fun.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.